Hi, welcome to the Fibershed and Community Panel Discussion with regional Fibersheds and a Fibershed business. My name is Mary Yule, and I'm part of Locally Dressed, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that this event takes place on the Keene, Keene, which is a traditional ancestral home of the Abenaki, the Pennacook, and the Wabanaki peoples, past and present. I acknowledge and honor the gratitude, the land and the waterways of the Aldnabak people who have stewarded Keene throughout the generations. I also would like to thank my sponsors for today's event, the Monadnock Food Co-op, for helping in so many ways to make this event happen. Radically Rural for help funding the live stream portion of this event, and Stonewall Farm for providing the venue at a reduced cost. Without partners, this work could not happen. I'd also like to thank the speakers for today's event who took time out of their lives and traveled here to impart their wisdom and inspired us all. The more I learn about Fibershed and fiber work, the more I realize I know pretty much nothing. So today's introduction is going to be an introduction and a reflection upon the work of regional Fibersheds and Fibershed businesses that support and promote local fiber in the region. And I became interested in fiber when I heard Rebecca Burgess, who wrote the book Fibershed and founded the National Fibershed Organization at Radically Rural in 2020. And I have to say, her words just hit me, not only because I was working in the nonprofit sector to promote clean energy, but also because I had been a fashion hound pretty much my whole life. Before moving up here. And I just, after hearing what she said, I could not let go of the idea. And I'm just a person that jumps into the deep end of everything. So without any, real deep knowledge or understanding, I just said, okay, I'm going to wear local clothes for a year. I'm going to try to recreate what Rebecca Burgess did. And I dove in, and I had so many people say, you're crazy. And maybe I am, as I learn more and more. But what I have done is committed to wear local clothing with swapped and upcycled clothing, and also clothing that comes from other regional fiber sheds. So you see me walking around in t-shirts, well, that's solid state t-shirts, and that is a fiber shed out of North Carolina. So I have expanded myself a bit because I do need to live in reality. And had I listened to these wise women earlier, I maybe would have made those adjustments, but I just jump. I did also want to take just a second to say why local fiber sheds are so important. These ladies will tell us why it's so important for the local region. But when we look at it globally and even across the United States, 81 pounds on average per American is being thrown into landfills and incinerated. And that, if you work it out by weight, and since I was a physicist and love numbers, I will tell you, is throwing away a t-shirt every 2 to 3 days for every American. That is crazy. And sadly, only about 15% or 12 pounds of it is recycled fibers. And typically that's with furniture or making rags. So thrifting is really, unfortunately, not a huge part right now of the answer. And I know this panel won't speak directly to that, but that is one of my founding drivers. And it really came to me that just like we want to have distributed power in our local systems so we can address our local power needs, clothing is no different. It's like buy local food. Everything that we can do locally makes us more resilient and Even though it seems overwhelming, I keep this quote from Rebecca Burgess in my mind when I wake every day, and that is keep asking yourself what you want to see. Even daily, ask yourself what you want to see, because that will turn into the manifested world. The troubles we are facing are daunting, so it's really important to give your time to keep dreaming. And I hope you will join me in this dream towards a real local and regional solutions. In today's program, speakers will address various topics about Fibersheds and a beautiful business model that is right here in Vermont. And then we will open the floor for questions. So if you already have some questions and you worry that you might forget them, there are paper and little note cards out front that you can jot some down. And if you're listening, please put your questions in chat. And I have wonderful Megan from the co-op behind me, which is going to whisper in my ear the questions. And then I will repeat everything into the microphone to make sure that everyone can hear, both in the room and who are virtual. And also, I guess, just one other little note is that there is water out in the hallway, and around the corner are restrooms, just in case you need it during the event. And so without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Parish of the Western Massachusetts Fibershed, who has been so generous of her time since the beginning of my learning, came up here to Keene early on to share about dyeing and questions I had. And I am so happy to have her cover the introduction about the Fibershed movement nationally and internationally, and in a bit of what the Western Massachusetts Fibershed is doing at home.
We're going to be sharing this mic, so I might have to, is that better? Okay. I'm also going to set a timer because I can talk a lot. So hi, everyone. I'm doing the portion of the presentation, which is sort of an introduction to what Fibershed is, as Mary said, both nationally and internationally. And then a little bit about what Western Mass Fibershed has been up to for the past 4 years. So the next slide is an image of a watershed, and the watershed is really like the namesake of how Fibershed got its name. As Mary said, Rebecca Burgess is the person who founded Fibershed over 10 years ago at this point in California. And the ideas that sort of make Fibershed, I think, really powerful and different and important in the world can be seen in a lot of ways in this image of a watershed. So I thought we'd spend some time just reflecting on what those aspects are. A watershed is a geographical area where the water comes through the water cycle, and it all gathers and eventually joins together in one river system. So smaller tributaries, come filter down and join together. And it's a sort of tangible physical representation of the fact that throughout the world, we are all intimately connected in this amazingly complex system of the water cycle. So even though a particular watershed is unique in its geography, its climate, where the mountains are, where the rivers are, how much groundwater is able to be stored in a region, how much rainfall a region gets, each of those things is unique. And in the same way, each Fibershed has unique sort of physical resources, but we're also literally all connected around our planet, around the Earth. And so, everywhere that water goes up into the atmosphere is vapor, falling down as rain, gathering in the streams and the rivers, going down into the aquifers, going out to the sea. It's literally connected. We are one world, and I just feel like that's central to the way that Fibershed affiliates and Fibershed as an organization thinks, is that we really are connected, so that issues that affect us locally are affecting the whole planet, and vice versa. So you've heard it said, think globally, act locally. That's one of the things we really aspire to do. And then, the pollution and things Mary was alluding to that are really part of the problem with the current textile system and the current fashion industry. Again, if you think watershed, if you think the water cycle, you can really see how those pollutants, those toxins, that waste like impacts us all. Okay, next slide is sort of, this is a graphic from the California Fibershed, and it's sort of one of the visions, again, that I think is really compelling about Fibershed, which is this idea of soil to soil. So you've probably seen the bumper sticker or said the slogan yourself, no farms, no food. And it's also true of our clothing, no farms, no clothes, with the exception of the fact that about 60% of global textiles at the moment are made from fossil fuels. So they are intimately connected to the fossil fuel industry with all of the pollution and environmental degradation that goes along with that, and microplastics shedding off of our clothing every time we wash them. So, but if you sort of try to transition to natural fibers and think about where natural fibers come from, they are an agricultural product. And so if you start with the soil, for example, grazing of sheep, which I know people will touch on today, or the growing of plant-based fibers like cotton or flax or hemp, those all depend on healthy soil. And there are many, many farming practices that Fibershed is researching and promoting that benefit sort of the health of soil. So building up the health of the soil and even enabling or strengthening the capacity of the soil to sequester carbon so that it becomes a carbon sink. Then there's all the steps in processing, and it's important to understand, as we are all connected, that at every step along the way, there are workers who do that work, laborers who do that labor, and it's a lot of the costs, the true costs of the labor in our current textile system are just hidden, and so one of the things that Fibershed wishes to do is sort of make transparent what the supply chain actually involves. So how is the wool processed? What are the mills that do that work? How are the designers and the creators thinking about the cloth that they're using? How do we think about the garments we're wearing? Like, Mary said, trying to reuse them, extend their life. This is actually a solid state clothing t-shirt with California grown cotton. North Carolina grown cotton. And so how we think about our garments and use them and try to extend their lives. Then the dyeing, and then other parts that go into the garment construction, thinking about what are those material resources and what are the consequences of the choices that we make about textiles. And then that a natural fiber can compost and come back into the soil and doesn't create microplastics and doesn't worsen pollution and doesn't add to our landfills or incinerators, right? A natural fiber can decompose. So goes back into the soil. So just a quick glimpse of Western Mass Fibershed and how we are trying to embody this idea. On the next slide is just a little sort of list of who might be in your Fibershed, and we'll hear a lot more about it from other folks here. But it's farmers, the shearers who shear the sheep, the mills who spin the yarn, the dyers who might add color using plant-based dyes, the designers, sewers, quilters, felters, any craftsperson who's using fibers to create a textile, and retailers, and finally consumers. So that's what we're talking about when we're thinking about a local textile supply chain, is all of those pieces, and probably more that I forgot to list. How are we doing on time? Because I can save the rest. Good, I think. Okay. So in Western Massachusetts, we have quite a lot of wool. And so when Western Mass Fibershed organized as a Fibershed affiliate, that's where we started. But in the next slide, you can see, as Mary was saying, that actually Fibershed is a national and an international movement at this point. And this slide, the little pink dots, this is just a screenshot from the Fibershed California website. It's a screenshot of the affiliates around the world at the moment that are doing local work in their communities and their Fibersheds, but are also aligned with and working in collaboration with the broader Fibershed movement. It's a little ironic that California and the West Coast gets cut off on this, because that's obviously where this whole movement began. And there's amazing projects going on the West Coast, including, bringing back flax in Oregon and California, and really amazing regenerative agriculture work being done. And it extends all the way to Southeast Asia, projects in India where they're using indigenous forms of cotton and trying to sort of reclaim local knowledge around cotton cultivation and practices for spinning beautiful cotton. So it's really incredible to be involved in this worldwide movement and to be able to share resources with people. We meet on Zoom, we share ideas, we share resources, we share what projects are happening around the country and around the world. And maybe I can talk a little more about projects and other fiber sheds if people want to know about that at the end. Our project has been, if you want to has been local cloth. So there's steps, the shearer, the processing. We've been getting our yarn washed and spun at Green Mountain Spinnery in Putney, Vermont. Then Peggy Hart weaves it into beautiful cloth and blankets. The yarns are for sale if you want to design your own clothes and knit your own things or sew your own fabric. And we also have cloth and blankets that we're selling made of entirely local wool, processed within roughly a 50-mile, processed and created within roughly a 50-mile radius from wool in Western Massachusetts. So that's a quick summary of what we've been up to. And I think I should close there. And there's more information on the tables over there later if you would like to check it out. So thank you.
My name is Katie Sullivan. I own Bobolink Yarns. I live in Irisburg, Vermont, up in the Northeast Kingdom. So go north on 91, keep going north, stop just before Canada. My portion of this is just a little bit more zoomed in and perhaps a little bit more specific. This is what happens when you want to solve New England's wool problems, but you're kind of allergic to committee meetings because I'm doing my project mainly on my own. So I am a shepherd, first and foremost. I have a flock of blue-faced Leicesters on my farm. And I'd been running 50 head of sheep and marketing my wool and very much kind of proportioning the amount of wool I produce to the number of fiber festivals I go to and having a nice balance of the two for a while. When yarn shops kept calling and saying, we feel like we're kind of showrooms for Amazon at this point. We have all these national brands and people come in, they squeeze it, and then they buy it online from like certain .coms for like a few bucks cheaper per skein, and we're losing out here. And visitors come to our yarn shop and they say, what do you have that's local? And the yarn shop says, well. Meanwhile, I knew a lot of fellow shepherds who had flocks of sheep. And I know it's kind of strange to think if you're somebody who's like considered getting 2 or 3 sheep as pets, that some folks have 50 sheep and no plan for their wool, but you'd be amazed how many folks there are who raise sheep, who are focused on meat or other products, and for whom the wool is just kind of like, oh, every year we take this wool off, we put it in garbage bags, we leave it in one corner of the barn, and we frantically run off to do the next task. And we just don't think about the wool, because on the wool pool, the New England Wool Pool, which is a kind of collaborative wool purchasing effort, they might get 30, 40 cents a pound. I remember the last advertised price that moved past my eyes was clean, white wool, free of chaff and hay and other bits, 35 cents a pound. So if you think about kind of a generic New England sheep, you might get 8 pounds of wool for 4 or 5 clean pounds. And so you're talking about $1 worth of wool on a sheep that costs $7 to shear. And you can see why shepherds just are not focusing on wool. So I have shepherds with wool, and I have yarn stores that want local wool. And all it seemed to take was a winter of boredom to connect the two, and a little bit of willingness to start talking to some mills and get some yarn made. And that's what I did. So I started with some friends of mine over at Scuttleship Farm in Panton, who raise Romneys. And then I expanded to Morsebrook Farm over just north of Brattleboro. And she has Cheviots, and she raises beautiful lamb's wool. And then just went on and on from there. This is some fiber from my neighbors in Hardwick. This is Snug Valley Coopworth. And it's the cool thing about this is that the wool itself, their whole flock is black. So their wool is natural gray. And it has this amazing glossy sheen. And there's just something really special to me about New England's wool. You know, if you raise your hand if you are a fiber crafter of some kind in this room, it would be helpful to, yeah, all right, everyone, virtually everyone. All right. You know, you go into a yarn shop and you see kind of merino this, merino that, merino alpaca, maybe BFL, if that's like the most exotic thing that we're getting into. And meanwhile, New England has all these fascinating sheep that aren't merino at all. Why aren't there merinos in New England? Weren't there merinos in New England some number of years ago? Yes, there were. But really, we've kind of changed the genetics of merinos since 1820. And folks are kind of wearing and using wool very differently than they did in 1820, where everything you wore top to bottom was going to be like some proportion wool, even on a day like today. Perhaps some linen, but not much cotton before the cotton gin was invented. Like merinos were just a little bit different then. I think that will be covered later. What New England raises really, really well is long wool and medium wool down breeds. I don't know if that has any meaning to anybody. We're talking about sheep who grow wool that is about 25 to 32 microns. So wool that some people will find a little bit like itchy scratchy. And wool that other people will be like, oh yeah, sure, why not? Right on the face. Depends on how much of a Yankee you are, maybe. So long wool has a beautiful drapey structure. This is a perfect example of it, where you hold up a skein and it just absolutely flops. And that is because the wool itself, each fiber is about 8 inches long. Each fiber has kind of a big, broad crimp to it. And so it doesn't have the kind of springy squeeze it and spring return structure that other wool does. It has this kind of soft flowiness, so it tends to drape and flow very nicely. The other kind of wool that we generate in large amounts, down wool, kind of structured similarly to merino, but coarser. The more farms that I brought on board and the more people I talked to, the more I realized that, you know, we've got kind of in Vermont, at least, we've got this proportion of folks who kind of, they raise some sheep and they use their own wool and they're making yarn on their farm. And then we raise sheep whose wool is very like appealing to folks, but we haven't made yarn yet. Those are the people whose wool I buy. I guess I should mention, because I mentioned the wool pool offering 35 cents a pound, I pay more like $2 to $3. I want the wool to at least break even. I try to do as fair a price as I can, but I'm also needing to move that wool into like a wholesale price that yarn shops can finagle. And I also need to eat. So somewhere in there I get to eat, but not that much in that whole kind of economic system. Sorry, an aside. So, right, there's wool, like kind of a proportion of wool that is very usable and appealing to fiber crafters. And then there's this bottom proportion here. There's a lot of wool that is too coarse, too dirty, challenging to process at our local mill shed for a variety of reasons. And I am working on some projects towards solving that are my own. I have a biomedical engineer who has some manufacturing ideas, and we're gonna look into, among the many solutions that are possible for that huge proportion of unusable and really not kind of knit-worthy wool that New England produces, ideas for using that. Recently, how's my time doing, if you don't mind? Thank you. Recently, another thing came across my desk because I've had Bobolink yarn since 2019 and gotten our wool into quite a few fiber shops, primarily in Vermont, but also in New Hampshire, Maine, and Massachusetts. I got a call from Darn Tough Socks. And they said they had been working with some graduate students. And this is just kind of another, like kind of a separate but similar Fibershed aspect where if you have a huge scale mill that knits socks and you turn on your sock machine and you need to make at least 1,000 socks, there's not much you can do with the little odds and ends, bits and bobs of wool that might be left over when you change suppliers, when you change color, you discontinue a product and change to a new one. They called me with tonnage of unused wool and said, what are some ideas? And because I can't stop myself from saying yes to things, I said, interesting, we can do something with that too. So this is a garment made from a 4-ply creation from waste wool from Darn Tough Socks. The wool that I've made from this represents about 4 times as much fiber kept from a landfill as all Vermont farms and sent to mills. And so it just makes me feel like the tiniest little tadpole in a pond to be like, oh, I guess we've just made this a whole like much bigger scale than it ever was before. So this is all superwash merino, very much different from what I can make from local yarn from local fiber. Yeah.
Okay, you want me to just keep talking, and then we'll just pick up and go back. So, in any case, the Darn Tough Wool project is super neat because you really save about 3 tons of fiber from the dumpster, and this is a fiber, whereas this takes somebody, a special fiber crafter who's willing to work with wool that has a texture, a woolly texture. Anybody who knits, crochets, fiber crafts in any way is probably going to find this acceptable. So it kind of solves a whole bunch of problems that this yarn
presents. Ironically to me, because what's exciting to me is local wool and local fiber and breed specific and like what is magical about this Coop worth in particular. But what's exciting to other knitters is this is just really soft and comfortable, and anybody that I give it to is definitely going to wear it. Pardon me. So I'm working on ways to use up all that Darn Tough fiber, and that's about to formally launch with a blog post in a couple weeks. So hopefully you'll all be hearing a bit more about that. But what an exciting collaboration to have a company, a large company, recognize, you know, we don't want to dumpster this wool, and we're not going to be so proprietary as to keep it all a secret and not tell people that we're doing this and just kind of hoard it to ourselves, but actually share it and say, like, on our scale, this is not usable. On your one frantic woman scale, can you use this? Pardon me. And for me to say, yes. How's the picture? No worries.
We still don't have a picture, so.
Okay.
But they can hear you.
All right. Gosh, okay. So then the question is, with all this extra fiber, you know, what do I make? I'm sorry, I have a little tickle in my throat and I might just have to solve that real quick. All right. You know, what do you make? And when you think about, so since this was a rare room that is filled with fiber crafters, but if you go out in public, you have a proportion of, you know, folks who start with sheep, then you have folks who fiber craft, and then you have the grand vast majority of people who wear clothes, ideally. And so we need to get to the place where we're making something that appeals to that large majority of people who simply wear clothes. So what can we make that's a finished product that processes this literal tonnage of wool into something that is very mass market? So the direction I'm going to is scarves. And on my table over there, you will see one kind of gray and white scarf. And that is made from, if you've ever seen a pair of Darn Tough socks, some of them have kind of a marled color. And that is made from that marled yarn. You know, I think I actually need to properly cough. And that is just like one way, like, how do we transform this, not just into kind of an upcycled, like kind of handmade, homemade looking thing, but something that looks like a real finished garment that's the same level of quality and same level of appeal as the socks themselves, but just kind of rescaled so that it makes sense to just use this little trickle of wool from their huge operation into something useful. So that's the direction I'm going in. If any of you know of a barn full of wool that is not being used, whose owners would like to part with it, you can always give me a call. And I will try to come. Just one woman in one truck, and so sometimes my time frame is a little bit slow. It's been a real, I think, to me, the other important thing that kind of comes right back to everybody here who is part of a fiber shed is how important community is to this effort. I spend a lot of my time yenting, right? Like, oh, you need a ram, you need a Romney ram. Yeah, let me think about some farms that I also go to that have really nice Romneys. Like, if you care about the fiber, I would say that their fiber is this way and this other farm's fiber is that way, and spend my time connecting people as I go from farm to farm, kind of cross-pollinating folks' efforts. Like, oh, you have an issue with your hay feeder, like, how can I advise you so that we can pay you a better price for your wool, have more clean wool that you generate next time around. Talking, oh, you weren't able to get your usual shearer out. I know that this other shearer has some time in June. How do you manage, like, do your sheep have lice? How do you treat for lice in a way that won't ruin the wool? Like, all these kinds of efforts, also fall under my purview because I am now going from farm to farm, seeing and experiencing other farmers' work. And it's been a real privilege so far, and I'm going to keep cranking out yarn. And we are fortunate in New England to have a plethora of mills and fiber crafters and skillful and talented people, and also fiber crafters who are open to and engaged with local fiber, and willing to give something like Coop worth a try. So thank you all so much.
You can go ahead and start with my first, and we can leave it up and then I'll go into the slides as we go, Mary. My talk is about the Vermont Fibershed and the sense of community, which I think everybody feels with the Fibershed they're in. And when I started doing this, I thought, geez, do I have enough to say? And I started doing bullet points of high points that I remember happening in Vermont. And pretty soon, I think I had too much. So, and I apologize. I'm going to try and not absolutely read this, but I don't want to miss any of these points because I think they're really important. The seeds of the Vermont Fibershed were sown in the 1970s, as they were in many Fibershed communities. There was a renaissance then of spinning, weaving, knitting, and dyeing that had captured the hearts of many of us. And in Vermont, that coincided with the Back to the Land movement. I moved up to Vermont in 1980, and at the time I was working as a production hand weaver, a craft I practiced for my livelihood full-time for over 40 years. I met several women in my community and in the adjoining community who were raising sheep and were spinning. We came together as a small group, a very small group that started with 4 women who met regularly to spin, share a meal, and share our lives. For a number of years prior to my arrival and continuing for a number of years after, a small regional event took place each May in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. This tiny sheep festival was packed with activity and took place on the grounds of the Birkeland Mansion in East Burke, Vermont. It was an estate and it had room for sheepdog demos and a historic and lovely barn to house just a handful of vendors and the sheep to shawl teams. But the back space of the barn was lined with tarps and the fleece to display fleeces that were for sale. And it was probably, well, I went to my first festival in 1981 up there. It was my first opportunity to buy a homegrown colored fleece. Prior to that time, I had to source colored Romney and border Leicester from New Zealand. And I still remember the fleece I purchased, how wonderful it was to spin. And I still have the piece that I wove from that yarn. In 1981, Green Mountain Spinnery opened as a worker-owned mill, offering an opportunity for fleece producers to have their yarn processed locally. And I think that was a huge milestone in where we are today in Vermont. Just to digress for a second, I want to introduce the concept of a shed, be it food or fiber, as a series of concentric circles moving outward. When I taught family and consumer science, formerly known as home economics, I introduced this concept with my middle school students to talk about food and food production. My goal was to get them thinking about where their food came from and how to access food locally. And being in a rural community, I live in Peacham, Vermont, which is near St. Johnsbury, but quite a bit smaller town. We started with their immediate family and would list any foods that they grew. A lot of the kids had small kitchen gardens at home, or their grandparents that lived nearby did. And we would talk about what foods they grew and what animals they or their family hunted or raised. Then on to local farm stands and farmers markets. And pretty quickly, we had the blackboard filled up with a lot of food we could get locally. But we can use that same image as we make our journey through fiber, textiles, and clothing production. Some of us raise animals, and this is one of my little colored Angora sheep, a kid. Some of us raise animals or take part in textile practice that produces finished goods for use by our family, ourselves, our family, and friends. If you don't produce your own fiber, you most likely know someone who does. If you are not a maker, it is likely that you know where to purchase locally made goods. Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont all host either a spring or fall fiber festival. Additionally, if you have animals, you are generally looking for a good share in your area or close region. You can do the next two slides. Those are some of my animals sunning, actually in a garden space I put them in. It was lambs one year. It was before I planted. And that's my neighbor, Ron Miller, who may share for some of you if you have alpacas or llamas. This story continues as we approach our 34th annual Vermont Sheep. Oh, before I start that, in 2009, Kimberly Hagan, some of you know her because she's working on the wool pellet project. She and I organized a Vermont Fibershed panel and presentation for the annual NOFA conference. The room was packed solid, and it opened up a discussion that many people wanted to have at that time. So the story continues as we approach the 34th annual Vermont Sheep and Wool Festival. You could do, yeah, the next slide. The Vermont Sheep and Wool Festival is a statewide event started in 1989 at the Vermont Technical College and was sponsored by the Vermont Sheep Breeders Association, which is now the Vermont Sheep and Goat Association. It later moved to Killington Ski Resort in Killington and was there for a number of years, and then on to the Champlain Valley Expo in Burlington, Vermont. The finances had been difficult in a large commercial setting. The dates were moved around on us, and it was hard to plan for both the vendors and the customers, and the Vermont Sheep and Goat Association seriously considered canceling the event, the festival. A move to the Tunbridge Fairgrounds in 2009 was monumental in a sense. You can go on to the next one, Mary. Yeah. At the time, I was president of the Vermont Sheep and Goat Association, and the festival was really important to me and dear to my heart, and an important piece of the Vermont fiber community. Several of us put our heads together, moving the festival to a smaller, more centrally located venue at the historical Tunbridge Fairgrounds. The landscape, located with mountains on the east and west at peak foliage season, is both practical and beautiful, and the scale of space and location that fit the size of the festival. That move allowed us to finally see our finances in the black, and that small profit was seed money for the next year. Could do the next one. Following the success The Vermont Sheep and Goat Association separated the finance, and work began on separating the festival from the association. The split was both friendly and supportive. It took several years, but the Vermont Sheep and Wool Festival is now a 501c3 educational nonprofit. A few years ago, we took the step of adding the Vermont Fibershed as a registered activity under our nonprofit to extend our work throughout the year. You can go on to the next one. The festival continues to work locally in producing our event. Our food vendors are small local businesses that offer good local food and food products. Many vend at local farmers markets. The Royalton Community Radio Station, the local non-commercial radio station, partners with us to produce the entertainment and parking duty. They round up a crew of volunteers and programmers for these tasks, and we make a substantial donation to the station as underwriters. This has been a great success for both of us. And as I usually go on the radio station the night before the festival to plug it. There's a local show that happens on Friday night, like what's happening in the area over the next couple of weeks. And they give me almost a whole hour to talk about the festival. You can go on to the next one. Vermont processing capacity is one of the real strengths of the Vermont Fibershed. We now have 5 processors in the state. And I spoke with each one of them in preparing for this talk. And I assumed a lot of them had duplicates in equipment, but only 2 of them actually have the same equipment. And the rest of them have a hodgepodge. And I don't mean that like it's uncoordinated, but they have old equipment, some new equipment, some from this company, some from that company. So there are a variety of yarns you can get made as a result of that. What Green Mountain Spinnery does is completely different from what one of the mini mills does. And rather than go into each of the processors and what they do, I will say that there are plans underway for the fall Northern New England Fibershed Roundtable. And 2 of us are working on a panel discussion about the processors in the 3 states. And we just talked this week, and I think we're going to try and put together a guide that will have information on all the processors. Our Vermont processors are Green Mountain Spinnery in Putney, Mad River Fiber Mill that's in Waitsfield, Kingdom Fleece and Fiber in East Hardwick, Junction Fiber Mill in White River Junction, and Vermont Fiber Mill in Brandon. They are literally scattered around the state. So in closing, I want to plant the idea of collaborating with other non-fiber community groups and members in the efforts to promote a local fiber shed. A strong local community will support all of us. And I want to encourage all of you to tell your stories. We all have them, and they are the tales that contribute to a place-based practice of textile making and its role in our lives. You can go ahead and finish there.
Heavier than I thought. Hi, my name is Leah Rossignol, and I'm one of the co-founders and the director of the Northern New England Fibershed. Thank you to Mary for bringing us all here. This is quite an amazing event, and it's really special for me to be sitting at the same table with all of these amazing women who've been doing work in this space for so long. I found my way to Fibershed kind of like Mary. I was a clothes hound, and about 7 years ago, I watched a documentary called The True Cost by Andrew Morgan. And if you haven't seen it, seek it out. It's somewhat devastating, but really important. So it kind of opened my eyes to something I think I already knew, but didn't really think about a lot, which was our clothes are often made in ways that are devastating to the environment and its people. So I found Fibershed through kind of going down a rabbit hole of where are my clothes made? How can I purchase more consciously, and found Fibershed. For a while, I was just an observer of all the wonderful things Fibershed affiliates were doing around the country and now internationally. But last November, I was lucky enough to start working for Sanborn Mills Farm, whose executive director was interested in being the fiscal sponsor of the Northern New England Fibershed. So we became an official affiliate soon after that and have been building our advisory board and developing our plan for deliverables in the past 6 or 7 months. Next slide. As you know, Northern New England was once home to a thriving textile economy. And unfortunately, all of that kind of went away due to increased outsourcing caused by NAFTA. A lot of our infrastructure just disappeared. Our Fibershed really focuses on reinvigorating those economies by providing opportunities for the individuals and businesses along the fiber supply chain to expand their production, increase their value of their materials and products. And we also hope to educate farmers who might not know about the importance of regenerative agriculture practices in sequestering more carbon and also improving the quality of their wool. Through this work, we hope to inflate the broader conversation around the need for shifting away from the current fast fashion model and more towards a model of bio-based circular textile economy, where, you know, our wool sweaters can be put into the compost when they outlast most of our other clothing products. And we've mended them and we've given them to other people and expanded their life cycle. So the photo, the photo right there is border Leicester sheep from Sanborn Mills Farm. We have a really small flock, but they're growing. Obviously, you can see the lambs. And we use their wool, which we get processed in Vermont because that's where all the processing facilities are. In a few of our natural dye workshops. So we're a working farm and education center in Loudon, New Hampshire. And we've got right now a lot of fiber workshops, including natural dyes, spinning. We've got some flax processing workshops, and we've got basketry and blacksmithing and all the things. So if you're interested, you can go on our website, sanbornmills.org. Next slide. So Fibershed's work so far has really focused on having conversations with our farmers because without them, we would have no fiber resources. In addition to researching our farms' wants and needs, we're also identifying our processing infrastructure, which is primarily in Vermont again. But there are a few processing facilities in New Hampshire and Maine. Although much of our work has been focused on wool because that's our most abundant resource, we're also really interested in bast fibers, so hemp and flax. And we've got a couple of really amazing folks in our Fibershed doing great work already in that space. We're also still trying to get an accurate picture of the landscape of our regional fiber supply chain. We sent out a fiber farmer survey in the beginning of December and got a fair amount of responses, but I know there are more fiber farms out there and it's just hard to get people to respond to surveys. So we're working on different ways to try to get a better response. Next slide. One important aspect of our work for the future is to educate community members about the importance of supporting regional supply chains and regenerative agriculture, much like what we're doing here today. We also recently started a bast fiber working group, which right now is basically just a really casual group of people who are excited about bast fibers. And we're hoping that that group turns into the foundation of our work on a bast fiber feasibility study for a regional mill. And we'll be working with other fiber sheds, including Michelle, to try to figure out how we can get processing for bast fibers in our region. The closest is in Taproot, I think, Nova Scotia. Well, Taproot is the name of the processing, and it's in Nova Scotia. I'm not sure exactly where, but it's in Canada. So it's kind of tough to get your recently had someone on our advisory board, Laura, try to go up there with her hemp, and it didn't go well. So it would be great if we had something in the States. We also plan to create some branding materials for producers and regional fiber products, which we hope will create a buzz around Northern New England fiber, kind of like local food and farm to table, that kind of movement has done. Part of this work will also include outreach and education to local brands that have larger budgets and audiences, which will help to catalyze the regional fiber movement, kind of like the work Katie's doing with Darn Tough. One thing that has been coming up a lot in our fiber farm visits is the need for some sort of mentor-mentee fiber farm succession program. A lot of the mostly women shepherds are aging out. So we need to make sure that we're connecting them and spreading their wisdom, which is vast, to the next generation of fiber farmers, just to make sure that we ensure the future of our regional fiber supply chain. We also plan to do an in-depth survey of our region's soil health versus fiber quality. So doing research on soil quality versus wool quality and figuring out if there's a connection between the two, which we kind of know there is. But we hope that that work will also kind of push folks who are a little bit, maybe they're not quite sure that regenerative agriculture practices will increase their or help their bottom line. This work might help prove that. And lastly, we hope to investigate the opportunities around textile recycling and using textile waste as a resource within our local communities. So the work will be kind of focused around talking to recycling facilities, and I'm not sure about here, but in my local community, we don't have any textile recycling. And it's really tough because I don't like to throw away textiles. So I just have a lot of odds and ends in my basement that are just sitting there for someday when we have textile recycling again. Last slide. Oh, was that the last slide? Oh, it's okay. That's all right. So the next slide was basically just speaking about our main focus for 2022, which is our roundtable event, which Jane mentioned a little bit earlier. The event will take place at Sanborn Mills Farm in Loudon on November 12th. Our keynote speaker will be Amy Default, and we'll have plenty of really interesting breakout sessions, including wisdom of New England fiber farmers, growing and processing bast fiber, fiber artisan and local supply chains, waste wool, working with brands, textile waste, and so many more. So we don't have anything up on our website yet, but keep checking back, and hopefully you'll see more about that in the future. So our website is nnefibershed.com. And you can also sign up for our email newsletter as well. And you can find me after, and I can give you our card to make sure you have all that information. Thank you so much for allowing me to share what we're working on and being part of the Fibershed movement.
Thank you, everyone. I wanted to open the floor to questions that you might have for the panel, and I have some, but I wanted to open it up to the audience and the people on chat before I start wagging my tongue. So does anyone have any questions for a panelist or the whole panel?
Often considered who everybody talks to, and just interested in maybe everybody sharing what your vision is for getting all of this amazing New England fiber actually into clothing form. So there's a lot of yarn. I'm a fiber artist myself, so I'm also like in this world. But there's a lot of yarn. I'm just wondering if the vision is everybody's kind of making their own sweaters, buying yarn at the
fiber shows and local yarn shops, or if there's any possibility of actually creating industry to be knit yarn or fabric that's light enough to wear year round.
That's actually a lot of questions in one. You really like packed it very heavy, but you took one of my big questions, because my whole blog, my whole vision is really for the non-specialist. You know, I am not going to raise sheep. I don't know if you are, but I'm allergic to almost everything green. And so no matter how much I would love to be out there, I'm not going to be. I have limitations. And I want to speak to the people that aren't going to be farmers, that aren't in the field every day, so intimately connected. You know, what is the vision to help bridge, you know, what I would call a fiber specialist to a consumer, right? Just a consumer that may or may not have talent knitting or crocheting. And it's open to all of you, anyone who wants to jump in.
I'll start because I have the microphone already. I would say infrastructure. I'm not sure if you guys would agree with that, but I think so much of what we're missing is infrastructure. And I can say that there is a brand right now in Maine who has made a Bartlett wool coat made from regional fiber. The brand's named Rudy Jude, and the cost of that coat is $850. So there's also a big part of the conversation around accessibility, scale. You know, I would love to buy that coat, but for me, that's not an option. So I guess that's kind of what I would say, infrastructure and accessibility scale.
I guess I think, having worked with food issues as well, that it's going to have to be a movement like the local food movement was. And, you know, some of those little regional things like local banquet, and there were local food, this area, that area. I think we're going to have to lay a guilt trip on people that clothing is equally as important as food, and also on our state and local agricultural associations, because, you know, USDA gives a lot of grants for greenhouses and all this stuff if you're growing food in it. But boy, if you mention doing anything with sheep or dye plants or anything in there, they don't want to talk to you, and you don't get counted for those grants. And I think there's going to have to be pressure put on politicians and local ag people. And to speak to one of your questions, Hannah, there now is a mill in processing hemp in St. Johnsbury. And I'm hoping to get Travis. He was a student of mine in my family and consumer science class. I never would have thought he would have gone into something like that. He has a degree in culinary arts, but to get him on that panel of processors in the fall, because I think that's integral. I've had lengthy conversations with him over at his house because his family's friends of mine. And I just said, you know, are you willing to take other people's hemp and process it? And we're going to have to move past wool only, because that's in this weather. Although I do have a wool dress on today, it's just not going to work. And we need that other piece as part of the fiber shed to keep it local, because otherwise we have to go way out of our fiber shed to get our summer clothes.
I agree with Leah and Jane that it is an infrastructure issue. Just for some perspective, like those scarves, you know, is going to be knitting those? Me. I'm going to be sitting at a hand knitting machine and grinding those out, because that is the level of infrastructure that we have for finished goods not, you know, not completely, but largely. I know Peggy Hart is here and she makes beautiful artisanal blankets
Fabric.
and fabrics, but she is also just one woman, more or less. And consequently, like we do have like, if the yarn infrastructure is so big, then perhaps like the finished good infrastructure looks more like this. And so there's definitely room for improvement and growth in that area. And certainly like a view towards, can we make it economically so that it's not a $850 jacket?
All right. So yeah, I agree with all of my learned colleagues here, but I can also put some numbers on it because that was trying to make local woolen cloth was what Western Massachusetts Fibershed started with. And that's what we've been doing for 4 years. The first run of cloth, literally the hard cost that we tracked, what the cost of the cloth was $95 a yard. And so we, the first run, we actually were grateful to receive a grant from Fibershed to fund it. A $4,000 grant or maybe 4,500, I forget. And the designers that we spoke to were basically like, there's no way I can buy cloth at $95, even at cost, and then make it into something and sell it. So the first time around, we decided to use it as an educational opportunity, and 10 different designers made garments and accessories and shoes and as people have been saying, Peggy wove the cloth. Peggy's got Crompton and Knowles looms from an old textile mill in Rhode Island. And it can be 60 inches wide and it's mechanized and it's much more efficient than those of us who are hand weavers can make. And even then, you're looking at hours of labor that need to be paid for if we're trying to do a model where, it's not exploitative and extractive and reproduces all the problems of the current system. The second time around, we got a better discount at Green Mountain because we brought more wool, and we're sourcing wool similarly to you from primarily shepherds who don't necessarily have a plan for their wool, or from meat farms who they need to shear their animals, but they're not going to spend time marketing their fleece or their wool. And because of the higher, we got a better discount for bringing in a larger quantity of wool, we were able to get the cost down to, I think it was something like $58 a yard. But we wanted to be able to see if we could get any small amount of profit from it to then go into future projects. So we're selling it, the bolts that are over there, at $75 a yard. So you can easily see how someone's coat would end up costing, if they're the designer, they're sewing, they're starting with yardage that's quite pricey to begin with. So I think those are some of the obstacles at the moment, is just like everyone's saying, the scale, the infrastructure. There's a mill in Connecticut named American Woolens. They're, have a much sort of larger scale and modernized scale of equipment. There's a mill in Eastern Mass called Draper that's does knitting with very fine gauge wools. And they're actually, I've been following them on Instagram, and they're doing some kind of local wool initiative. I'm not positive, but something to follow. So yeah, I mean, at the moment, the cloth that we're making really could only be used by a person who intends to sew their own clothes and not then sell it themselves at some kind of markup. You know what I mean? So each step of the process, there has to be a little markup for anyone to get food and eat or pay their rent or their vet bills or all the other expenses. So I guess I'm just acknowledging that there's a long way to go, but that is the vision, is for us to be able to clothe ourselves locally, not just with wool, but also, fabric that would be comfortable in today's weather also.
I wanted to say one of the other pieces that's missing, and it's missing in Vermont, it's missing in a lot of places. When I was in school in the early 70s, I got a degree in the Department of Home Economics in clothing and textiles. I learned a lot about clothing construction, tailoring. I worked I took classes where we did testing of textiles, and that used to be part of a home economics or family consumer science curriculum. At the school I went to, Florida State, they ditched the clothing part of it. It's not even available. And the same thing has happened at UVM. So all the equipment that could test our naturally dyed fibers to see how fast they are and so forth. And any kind of construction, pattern making, all that is gone from the state universities. I don't know if New Hampshire has that option, but if we really want a local economy, we need some place where people can get trained that aren't going to come out just to be home sewers, but might design on a small scale. I mean, if they go to a big school in New York or they go to RISD, they probably are going to get funneled into a bigger business than what we're talking about up here. And yet there's a real viable industry that can happen if people are trained. And I don't see that happening right now.
One more thing, sorry.
I know, there, it came on. I would like to add that there is one company, Muriel's of Vermont, that I've been working with, and I've been wearing some of their clothing, but their wool is too warm, but they do farm to closet. And if you just Google them, Muriel's of Vermont, they have a full line, which is farm to closet, and they get all of their wool from the local region, either Vermont, New Hampshire, maybe some in Massachusetts, but, and they also have an industrial knitting machine. So they're trying to model, and their products are quite a bit more obtainable because they are making them with a knitting machine, you know, that does all that work for them. So I would say their sweaters and vests range from maybe $90 to $200. So all of a sudden, something that would be, you know, really, really, you know, kind of expensive, that $700 jacket, it's more obtainable. It's something that maybe people could save. You know, like Rebecca Burgess says, try to buy one local piece of clothing a year. And if you went shopping there, it certainly might be something that many of us can do. And I want to be respectful that it may not be something all of us can do. But I wanted to give them a plug because they are truly farm to closet. Yeah. So are there any other? It looks like there's a question in the back. We have a question that I want to shoot just before, but I want to be able to read it correctly.
Just while she's doing that, I'll add one more thing, which is, you know, this is probably a group that doesn't need this conversation, but expanding the conversation around buying less with higher quality is also really important because we're just, maybe not we, but the world is just used to buying so many things for such a small price. Yeah, but you probably already know that because you're here.
Yeah, I like to tell my husband, and he was absolutely amazed, and he did not believe me at first, that the price of a shirt, an average shirt, has actually gone down from 2015 to today, to give you an idea of how we are making more and more clothes with less and less quality. So I will tag on to that. I did want to get a question from one of our listeners remotely, and it says, has any of the Fibershed groups had any kind of productive relationship with the Shave 'em and Save 'em program? And I apologize because I am showing my ignorance. I don't know Shave 'em and Save 'em.
I can speak to that. The Shave 'em to Save 'em was the livestock conservancy that in an effort to promote use of rare breeds and hopefully bring up their numbers of sheep. I don't think any goats were involved in that one, but they started this program. I think it's going on its third or fourth year now. It's sort of become a permanent thing with them. It was supposed to just go 1 year, where you get a little passport and there's different breeds listed in it, and people that are registered selling yarn or fiber from those breeds gives you a sticker and you put it in there. And when you fill it, you get a prize. But there's a whole Facebook page on it. And the whole purpose of it is to promote rare breeds that are in small numbers, and get consumers to use either the yarn, the fiber, or whatever. And I think it's been pretty successful. They have a Facebook page, and it's on the Livestock Conservancy's website.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you
is
so much, Jane.
there's some real fun things. I mean, there's been a few sweater challenges thrown in there, a few things like that. But you could just kind of work along on your own as you do something with a breed. You get your little sticker and, put it in your passport and get your tote bag or whatever you get. I mean, they had some pretty good prizes, actually. So.
Okay, thanks, Jane. I wanted to take the question that's in the back.
Oh, sure. I think it's actually just, Stephen, you were talking about organization.
Oh, okay. So the question in the back was just asking the name of the company. It's actually a company. It's a for-profit. It's in northern Vermont, in the Lake Champlain. I forget the little island, but it's called Muriel's of Vermont. So MURIEL''S of Vermont. So that's the company that you can get. They have sweaters and vests, I believe, that are made farm to closet. And are there any questions now? Yeah, Nicole.
So I actually, this is speaking back to the guidelines, I know a lot of different requests, one of them being Ross, Mary, and I have talked about this, like consider busted women, people don't realize how having something natural close to your body is so important for our health. And I just was wondering if you have insight onto that. Like currently I wear a merino bralette and like a regular bra on top of that, because I want that to be close to me. And I also noticed like people just seem to experience the fact that when they sweat, they don't stick because they're not wearing synthetics. Like that's a huge reason as well. So I was wondering if you have any insight on that, if you're connected to anyone or designer wise or how that works. I think that would be a health connection.
I just wanted to butt in, I'm sorry, so that everyone that's listening online can hear the question. So the question was really about wearing natural fibers against your skin, and specifically talking about bras that are inclusive and fit everyone, from, a small breasted woman to a larger breasted woman like myself. And, really connecting the fact that synthetics against our bodies, especially when they have sprays on them to make you sweat less, can be bad for you. And, how can we work, or what might Fibersheds be thinking about in this arena of what you might call intimate wear?
Well, I'll speak to that because I've had this conversation with an oncologist at Dartmouth, having had a small lump that was probably like a stage 1. It wasn't horrible, it was removed. And they also check your lymph node. I am banned. I wear it like a t-shirt anyway, so I don't, but I can't wear an underwire bra, which would never have been my style anyway, because anything that holds moisture and so forth up against your lymph nodes under your arm or up against your breast is bad for breast health. And what's shameful is you have to have something happen before they tell you this. And the other thing is, most deodorants are not approved. They told me Tom's of Maine was the only thing that didn't have toxic chemicals that I should not have near my body anymore. So that's a really valid point, and it would be good to get somebody that could speak to that further, because people need to hear that before they end up at the doctor's office with a bad mammogram or a lump, finding a lump.
Yeah.
There is one brand in Maine right now called Brook there, BROOK there. And they are currently not doing like regional textiles, but they do have organic cotton, and they're made all in Maine. So that might be an option. It's also one of the brands that our Fibershed is hoping to educate about regional fiber. So hopefully someday in the future, they'll have, you know, regional fiber, potentially wool undergarments. So hopefully someday soon.
So just to answer your question, not at the moment. I don't know anyone who's working on that, but it's such a great idea. And specifically that wool actually doesn't smell. So one of the reasons, you know, that you can, you may wish to invest a lot of money in woolen garments is that they're very, very durable. They need to be washed far less, frankly, than synthetics, because they just don't smell, they don't build up odor, right? Similarly, linen has naturally antibacterial properties. So it's really, I think it's a fantastic idea. And I just wanted to say, just put in a little plug for, I think it was in your book, Peggy, that there's information about like historically, like, you know, bathing suits and things like that were made of knitted, very fine gauge knitted wool. And in fact, there's been a return among some athletes to high performance athletic wear made out of wool because it's very stretchy and resilient and has all these wonderful properties that synthetic fibers are trying to mimic and reproduce. So maybe we're, you know, we can connect with some of that athletic, like really high-end athletic wear and sort of raise that conversation. But Mary, do you want to talk about your woolen underwear experience?
Oh. So Michelle is bringing up the fact that I actually, in the very beginning of my challenge, the first thing I did was crochet my own underwear. And it just so happened that I found this woman online and she wasn't using a pattern and she just talked you through making this underwear and fitting it to your body. And I said, wow, that's my speed anyway. Maya, if you look up Maya Crochet, she's fantastic in that way. And I made my own underwear and I started wearing it. And I'll tell you, I would wear it for days and it was absolutely great. And I know you might think, ew, ew, but it was absolutely fine. I would just take it off and hang it up and then put it on the next day. And that's what I'm doing with all of my wools. I barely wash them. I usually wash it in gentle, after I first make it, if it's a little bit too big, because unfortunately a lot of patterns aren't made to fit your body and you start moving on as a pretty much novice as I was. But you can absolutely make your own underwear. And I have been making a few different styles, you know, of bralettes and trying to get it right, but it's very hard when you're very busty. Like I am, and a lot of these are laced in the back, and you know that's not really who's going to put on a bra in the morning and then run around and get your partner to lace you in. You know, I mean that it doesn't make sense. So I'm trying, but of course, you know, I dove into that too. But thanks for that plug. And I just want to let you know, you really can wear wool underwear. I'm not wearing it today, though, I will admit. But I am wearing this wool top and it's absolutely fine. And it's from a local farm in Massachusetts. And they also, I will put one plug in, I'll get to you, Juliana. They also make, it's called Knit and Dye or Peaked Mountain Homestead. And they have some wool which has butterfly, milkweed in it. So it's really, it has a slickness to it. It's a combination of, I think, wool alpaca and milkweed. And I urge anyone who loves to work with different yarns to check that one out as well, because I see it as something that it's a DK weight for anyone who knows what that is, you know, a lighter weight yarn. And I hope to make skirts and loose pants out of it. Yes. And I'll just repeat what Juliana asked, and she's really asking about the people that might be on remotely in rural areas that don't have their own fiber sheds. What can these people do to try to build up momentum and maybe start their own fiber shed in their region? Does anyone?
So I can say that about four-ish years ago, I tried to start a New Hampshire fiber shed by myself, and it didn't work out because I was by myself. So I think my suggestion would be to find your community and find people who are also interested in helping, because you know, since November, we've just made such amazing progress, and trying to do it on my own for about a year and a half was just very stagnant. So yeah, find your people. And a good way to do that is to go on Fibershed's website and look through their producer directory. There might be somebody who's doing something cool and interesting in your community. And maybe there just isn't an official affiliate in your community. So yeah, I would just say that.
I found that it was really important to, you know, from the perspective of like, what can one person do, to meet farmers where they are. You know, wearing my farmer hat when somebody comes in with an agenda and says like, I'd like you to like kind of rearrange what you're doing to suit my agenda. Like, I don't have time to do that, right? Like, you can't come in and say like, we think that you should like feed your sheep differently over winter or what have you, because I've already designed the infrastructure to do a certain thing. I'm not sure if that's making complete sense to everybody. But like when I go to farms and I find that their wool is dirty, because it has, say, hay-chaff in it, then we can have a conversation where I say, so I could pay you more if there were less hay-chaff. And then I need to wait for their response to see, you know, why is there hay-chaff, and what is there any room for changing how they feed so that there won't be hay-chaff. And sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is, I went, in fact, to this farm this year. I know they wouldn't be shy about me sharing this. To this farm this year, and they didn't know that their sheep had some lice, and a lot of their fleece was felted. And their response to me being unable to buy it was, oh, well, maybe next year. And to treat their sheep for their lice, of course. So I think to approach, if you're going to approach farmers about using wool, or, you know, asking them for something, be prepared for them to not necessarily be ready to just change, like put down what they're doing and do something else because it would be great for a fiber shed, right? Does that make sense to folks? Not if it makes sense. All right, fantastic.
I was just going to say that the first thing that we do when we go to a farm is ask, how can we help? So it's because, which is also really easy for me to do because I know very little about, well, I know more now, but I knew and still know very little about fiber farming. And it really, for our organization, I think for many fiber sheds, it is about supporting the farmer. It's about supporting the people who are already doing the work and seeing what we can do as an organization to support them and help them grow. And some of them don't want to grow too. Like, that's the other thing that we found, you know, some of these shepherds who have backyard flocks are just like, I'm fine. I don't need, I don't need to grow. I don't need to expand. I don't need to clothe your community. And that's fine and great. And I still respect and in awe of a lot of the work that they do. I keep saying I'm going to write a book because there's so much female wisdom in our region around fiber farming, and it's just remarkable.
I'll just add that the theme of from this year's Vermont Sheep and Wool Festival is women farmers.
I did want to add, as I was getting ready for the event, I thought of the quote, and I don't know, maybe many of you won't remember it, but it was Ginger Rogers' quote about dancing with Fred Astaire. You know, she always said, I have to do everything backwards and in heels that he's doing. So just a cute little thing about women, because I was thinking about you four coming and speaking to that and having so much wisdom and ability. Not to take away anything from the wonderful men that are doing fantastic work here as well. I don't want to, sideline that. I did have a question from the chat, and it's, is there a central clearinghouse for the fiber events in the region where a small scale producer can display and sell goods? And I feel like maybe I could give some ideas, but I wanted to give it out to you guys. I was thinking maybe some of the events, but I'll let Jane.
I'm pretty sure on the Vermont Fibershed website there, Terry puts lists of events. As far as where somebody could sell stuff, depending on their size, if they're big enough, there's a fiber frolic, which is coming up in Maine, I assume in the next couple of weeks. Yeah, and the New Hampshire Wool and Sheep Festival just happened, and Vermont happens in the fall. Those are all options, although I think a lot of those festivals do have a waiting list. But even local farmers markets, I would suggest, if people are small, to check with your local farmers market, because if you're not that big, don't spend all the money to go to a larger venue if you don't have enough goods to sell that way. And if you can get a local following, I mean, that's a great start. So anyway, usually local farmers markets, there's some kind of directory in each area or each state through the Department of Ag that lists those kinds of things.
I'm not sure where this person is located, but we recently attended as a Fibershed the New Hampshire Sheep and Wool Festival. And as I was sitting there all weekend with nothing to sell except for information, I thought, so we are maybe toying around with the idea of having things to sell from our region. So if this person might be in our region, which is New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont, they could always reach out, and because we are thinking about having items from our regional Fibershed for sale.
And I just wanted to add that I know that Vermont, I don't know where this person is tuning in from as well, but I know that Vermont has a directory of local producers, and actually with some category searching ability, which is really nice. So that could be a possibility if they're from Vermont. Yeah.
So, and I just wanted to say Massachusetts also has a sheep and wool craft fair, which is coming up this weekend, Memorial Day weekend. It's always, you were talking about the troubles of moving from venue to venue and getting your dates bumped all around. It's always Memorial Day weekend. It's always at the Cummington Fairgrounds. It's been going, I think, 40 or 45 years. It's very sweet. So if you're in the Western Mass Hill towns next weekend, check it out. But specifically regarding a central clearinghouse, there's not one for our region at the moment. And I think it's something a lot of the Fibershed affiliates have been working on. I know we've been trying to set up a directory Ours is more like a supply chain directory, and the vision that we're going for, which would go all the way from fiber farmers to retailers, in the hopes that, people can find what they're looking for and make connections. I know lots of the affiliates are trying to put their directories together and put them online. There is a model in California in the Inland Empire Fibershed, which is an online marketplace, and they're selling goods from, they sell goods online. And I think Northern California also has a Fibershed marketplace. So that's a direction that some of us may go at some point, but it's, at the moment, we don't have like a central clearinghouse.
I guess I just wanted to speak to that question as well. I know in the Monadnock region, and I don't know if it's elsewhere, we have an indie shop local online, which sells specifically local items. And so if you are in the Monadnock region, I would just Google them, indie shop local, and see if maybe you can get some of your items on there. And also at local stores, we are so fortunate in this area to have the Hannah Grind Marketplace, which really specializes in local artists, and certainly fiber is the fiber and any fiber art. And reaching out to any of those kinds of shops. And of course, it would be not, every time you have a middleman, just like Michelle was saying earlier, you wouldn't be making quite the input, but then you wouldn't have that kind of marketing end, just like what, Katie is doing on a really big level, right? She is really, taking over the yarn creation. So those are just some ideas. And earlier online, someone wanted to see your yarn, Katie, and I was hoping you could hold them up, and the guys are going to do a really fast zoom and maybe show the different, how one flopped again and the.
Well, they're the same.
Oh, they're the same.
I mean, I have a table covered in yarn over there, so it might be more pertinent to show that.
Yeah, they're gonna screen.
You could
They're
do it.
gonna go over to that afterwards.
Okay,
But
maybe we could do a display of that, because this is just two skeins, one undyed and one dyed, of one particular yarn.
and what kind of yarn is it?
This is Snug Valley Coopworth from Hardwick. And so
Okay.
it's a Coopworth fingering that has kind of a high gloss and high drape, and really shows off like specific breed characteristics of one of the breeds that is most common in kind of medium scale production flocks in northern New England.
And I will say that I am wearing a pair of socks that I was so lucky to have knitted from this. And they're really nice. I'm really enjoying them. And I actually have some socks knitted from a few other of your, a couple other of your yarns. And I know that you have a soft yarn, but at that point I was like a total 100% wool. Since then, I've eased up a little bit, and I will use a little bit of man-made fibers. But I do, everyone should check out the table. And I just wanted to know if there are there's one more question. Oh, two more questions.
So this is going back to what we asked about fiber festivals and there's a website called Knitters Review. They have a crazy detailed calendar of knitting related, but mostly the fiber events all over the world. So it's like hundreds in the US.
Yes, I had just forgotten. So it's a Knitters Review. So if you wanted to look and find out fiber festivals in your region, it's an international website, so it's going to have it all over the place, but you can put in the state or a couple of states and see where there might be a fiber festival for you. And so that's a great way to find out how to get out and sell your product. Yes. I just wanted to try to pare that question down for the people online. So it was really a question about natural dyes and could natural dyes and the mordants, which is the compound that actually binds the dye to the material, be harmful to you? And if you do not, well, some can be harmful to you. And also, if dyes are coming in overseas, I think you were saying, or can we trust them? And excuse me?
You don't have to buy dyes from overseas because we have a lot of.
Oh, okay. And she was speaking to the question of local dyes. And maybe because I know that we have a dyer here that might want to address some of these issues. And I'm sorry that I hacked your question up, but hopefully Michelle can address local dye issues.
And also Jane is a natural dyer also. I mean, mostly I feel like you were just sharing information, not so much a question as how I was hearing you. And I think, so I do use aluminum sulfate when I'm dyeing wool and sometimes aluminum acetate for cotton, although we were just and linen, just talking about how I find cotton frustrating even after many years. But you're exactly right. There's a lot of plants that we can grow in New England. There's a lot of plants that grow quite prolifically that if you're a home dyer, you can easily gather. And I think if you're dyeing for yourself and you don't mind that your color will be, fading over time and you want to re-dye every year or so, that's a practice I think a person may choose for themselves as like a way of thinking about the medicinal quality of plants. One thing that we didn't really touch on in this panel is what it would take to scale up natural dyeing in any way for a regional textile system. It's a really complicated question, frankly, because it touches on issues around land use, like what are we using our land for? I grow woad, for example, which is a brassica, and it's related to cabbage and mustard and things like that. I suppose you could eat it, but that's not why people grow it. And I sometimes wonder, how many acres would we need to put in of woad to produce local blue? Whereas might that be better spent on acres of cabbage that we can eat, So it's, I feel like it would be a bigger conversation for a Fibershed community to decide how much land to allocate to growing plants for dyes and which plants and how they were used. And then there's the water, certainly water could be cleaned before being released, and any potentially harmful compounds like aluminum could be, you could clean the water in various ways before discharging it. I think those are solvable problems, but there's a lot of things to be considered.
Well, I too use aluminum sulfate and cream of tartar, which is a food additive, and I think it's obtained through something in the winemaking process, tartaric acid. The cream and tartar is pretty natural. And some people do use, alum can be used in pickling. I personally wouldn't use it that way. There is a substitute, a plant, Simplacos. I don't know that it grows up here. We had a huge discussion with Michelle Garcia about this in Philadelphia, probably about 10 years ago. And we were all able to buy some. And it was something like $15 or $20 or more a pound. And you needed a pound of it to more than a pound of wool. So it starts to become prohibitive on a large scale. I do buy some of my dyes outside the region, but when I get cochineal bugs, I buy it from a farmer's cooperative in Peru. It's a difficult one. If you're a colorist, it's hard. And it's hard to get a lot of plants up here that are fast. You can get weld, which is a yellow. It's either a very anemic yellow, or if you have hard water or add calcium carbonate, you get this like neon yellow that's great for over dyeing with indigo. Up where I am, to dye with indigo, you really have to start it in a greenhouse ahead of time because I don't have a long enough growing season. And madder root, they say in New England, needs to go 5 years before you harvest it. And to grow it for 5 years, I do think it's a dilemma, and I don't have the answer. I still do get dyes from out of the area.
I am not a natural dyer, but this conversation is really bringing up for me just another reason why this is such a hard conversation and it's so complicated. I think for the local food movement, I mean, we can try to emulate that as much as possible, but because the way we produce clothing we've been separated from it for so long, I think it's going to take a really long time to understand all of the different intricacies throughout the process. And that includes like the conversation around, should we grow dye plants or food? And there's so many more of those complicated conversations around how we make clothing. So it's hard, but we're doing good work.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So much of the first quote I gave from Rebecca Burgess on how this is such a daunting issue. It really is. It's a huge issue. It has so many really complex parts that we could spend weeks and weeks talking about and thinking about. I wondered if anyone else had any question. And if there is any, so I guess if there's no more questions, I will let everyone just disperse. I hope if you do have some questions that you want to give individually to the speakers, you will. And I hope you look at the fiber that's on the table and the information, and I'll let Michelle and Katie go so they can man their tables. And thank you so much for coming. I wanted to thank again all my speakers and my sponsors. And I hope you took away at least one thing today, one little good nugget or website. Thank you again.